Hello, today I'd like to talk about replacing the check spring on the high-performance tension assembly of the Innova M series machines. So the first thing I like to do when replacing the check spring is remove the front tension assembly from the sew head. And in order to do that, you need access to the set screw that holds it in place. And that set screw is located behind this rubber grommet on the faceplate, upper right corner. And then I use a 4mm T-handle to get in to the set screw and loosen it. And then you should be able to pull the assembly out. So once I've removed the front tension assembly from the sew head, I can now take it apart so I can get access to the check spring to replace it. So what I'm going to do is take this knob off and this washer, the spring holder, and I have two Teflon washers here, the rotary wheel, second washer, and now I can release the check spring from the base. So to release the check spring from the base, there's a set screw on the back right here, and I usually use a optical screwdriver, something small enough to get at this screw. Turn it counterclockwise. Then this post should slide out, and then I usually take my screwdriver and just flip the spring out, pull it out from the base, go get a new one, and reverse the process. So once I get my new check spring, all I'm going to do is hook it around into this slot, flip it into the base, then I'm going to grab my post. And what's important is there's a slot on this post right about here. And I want to try to line that up with a little tail that's hanging down inside the base here from the check spring. Because what I want to do is get it to grab onto that spring so I can rotate the spring while I'm rotating the post. And you know you've got a good connection there. So once I've done that, I'm going to reassemble the front tension assembly just the way I took it apart. So washer, rotary disc, washer, spring base, spring, and the gear. And I want to make sure that the gear side is facing up so it grabs onto the knob, and then I'll screw the knob back on. So at this point, I haven't added any tension to the spring, and we're going to do that here in just a second, as soon as I get this knob a little tighter. Once I've reassembled the front tension assembly, I need to put some tension on the check spring. And the way I do that is I tighten this knob just enough so when I rotate it, I can turn the rotary wheel as well. And you can see I'm now able to do that. So what I do is I bring the check spring up to the top of a slot, and then I rotate the rotary wheel a couple windows, and then I'll pinch it, make sure everything's seated, and then I'll tighten the set screw. And from there, I should be able to flip the check spring and have it snap back to the top of the slot. Then I know I got a decent amount of tension on the spring. And for the next step, we'll put it back in the machine and do some test stitching. Okay, I've just put the front tension assembly back into the sew head. And there's a couple things I want to look for. One, I want to orient the U of the check spring to be at about a 10 o'clock position in relation to the side of the head. And 2, I want to have a gap on the left side of the slot so the check spring isn't rubbing on the sew head. And 3, the top of the slot should be at almost a 12 o'clock position. And 4, the tail of the check spring should be underneath the thread break sensor, and that light should be a solid light. Okay, I've got the front tension assembly back into the sew head, and I've done my orientation. And the next thing I need to do is adjust the top tension. If you recall earlier when we were adding tension to the spring, I turned the knob fairly tight so I could get control of the rotary wheel. I think that's going to be a bit too tight to do some stitching. So what I normally do when I've taken apart and put the front tension back is I turn the knob back to where there's very little, if any, tension on the spring. And now I should be able to pull on the thread and not see that check spring come down at all. So now I know I'm pretty much at 0 on the tension. So now what I'm going to do is turn this knob 3 or 4 full revolutions. And now see what happens to the spring when I pull on the thread. And now it comes down all the way just below the thread post. So now I know I'm at a pretty good starting point to start doing some test stitching.